We would like to welcome you to our Holocaust Memorial Day Assembly as you join virtually with all the classes of Ayr Grammar Primary who are joining from their own classrooms.
Today we remember events that have happened in the past, sometimes in the last few years. Events that were very bad, where many people suffered. But we hope we can learn from them and remember the people who lived through these terrible times and acted bravely.
Today, the 27th of January, is Holocaust Memorial Day. That's a day each year where people all around the world stop and remember the 6 million Jewish people who were systematically persecuted and murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators during the Holocaust.
On Holocaust Memorial Day, we also remember the other groups of people that were persecuted and murdered by the Nazis, such as Roma and Sinti people, Gypsies, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, and many others.
Holocaust Memorial Day is when we remember the millions of men, women and children who have been murdered in the genocide which followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. Genocide is when a group of people is targeted for destruction just because of who they are, such as their race, their background or their faith.
Genocide does not just happen out of the blue. It's the result of prejudice and persecution which leaves a group treated differently from everyone else.
On Holocaust Memorial Day, we are reminded of what can happen when hatred, prejudice and persecution are left unchallenged, and of our responsibility to stand up against these.
It is our hope that by learning about the past, perhaps our generation can finally get to a point where people will never again have to suffer because of where they come from or what they believe in,
but instead be able to live their lives in liberty and free from fear. Hopefully from today's assembly, you will realise that we can all make a difference. We'd like to share a story with you this morning. It is an allegory. We would like to thank the University of Nebraska Press for the kind permission to use this story and its images for our online commemoration.
As you listen closely to the story, please watch the images on the screen that were drawn by the illustrator Stephen Gamal to accompany the story and reflect on the actions of the characters. The clearing in the woods was home to all the small forest creatures. The squirrels and the birds shared the trees, the rabbits and the porcupine shared the shade beneath the trees, and the frogs and the fish shared the waters of the cool brown forest pond. They were content.
Until the day the terrible things came. Little Rabbit saw their terrible shadows before he saw them. They stopped at the edge of the clearing and their shadows blotted out the sun.
We have come for every creature with feathers on its back. The terrible things thundered.
We don't have feathers.
The frog said.
Nor we.
Said the squirrels.
Nor we.
Said the porcupines.
Nor we.
Said the rabbits. The little fish leaped from the water to show the shine of their scales, but the birds twittered nervously on the top of the trees. They rose in the air, then screamed away into the blue of the sky.
But the terrible things had brought their terrible nets and flung them high and caught the birds and carried them away. The other forest creatures talked nervously among themselves.
Those birds were always too noisy.
Old Porcupine said.
Good riddance, I say.
There's more room in the trees now. The squirrel said. Why did the terrible things want the birds?
Asked Little Rabbit.
What's wrong with feathers?
We mustn't ask.
Big Rabbit said.
The terrible things don't need a reason. Just be glad it wasn't us they wanted.
Now there were no birds to sing in the clearing, but life went on almost as before, until the day the terrible things came back.
Little Rabbit heard the thump of the terrible feet before they came into sight.
We have come for every bushy-tailed creature that lives in the clearing.
The terrible things thundered.
We have no tails.
The frog said.
Nor do we, not real tails.
The porcupine said.
The little fish jumped from the water to show the smooth shine of their fin tails, and the rabbits turned their rumps so the terrible things could see for themselves.
Our tails are round and furry.
They said.
By no means are they bushy.
The squirrels chattered their fear and ran high into the treetops, but the terrible things swung their terrible nets higher than the squirrels could run and wider than the squirrels could leap, and they caught them all and carried them away.
Those squirrels were greedy.
Big Rabbit said.
Always storing away things for themselves, never sharing.
But why did the terrible things take them away?
Little Rabbit asked.
Do the terrible things want the clearing for themselves?
No, they have their own place.
Big Rabbit said.
But the terrible things don't need a reason. Just mind your own business, Little Rabbit. We don't want them to get mad at us.
Now there were no birds to sing or no squirrels to chatter in the trees, but life in the clearing went on almost as before, until the day the terrible things came back again. Little Rabbit heard the rumble of their terrible voices.
We have come for every creature that swims.
The terrible things thundered.
Oh, we can't swim.
The rabbit said quickly.
And we can't swim.
The porcupine said.
The frogs dived deep into the forest pool, and the ripples spiraled like corkscrews on the dark brown water. The little fish darted this way and that in streaks of silver, but the terrible things threw their terrible nets down into the depths, and they dragged up the drifting frogs and the shimmering fish and carried them away.
Why did the terrible things take them?
Little Rabbit asked.
What did the frogs and fish do to them?
Probably nothing, Big Rabbit said. But the terrible things don't need a reason. Many creatures dislike frogs, lumpy, slimy things. And fish are so unfriendly, they never talk to any of us. Now there are no birds to sing, no squirrels to chitter, no frogs to croak, and no fish to play in the forest pool. A nervous silence filled the clearing, but life went on almost as usual until the day the terrible things came back. Little Rabbit smelled their terrible smell before they came into sight. The rabbits and the porcupines looked everywhere except at each other.
We have come for every creature that sprouts quills.
The porcupines bristled with all their strength, but the terrible things covered them in their terrible nets, and the porcupines hung in them like flies in a spider's web as the terrible things carried them away. Those porcupines were always bad-tempered, Big Rabbit said shakily. Prickly, sticky things. This time the little rabbit didn't ask why. He knew that the terrible things didn't need a reason. The terrible things had gone. The smell still filled the clearing.
I liked it better when there were all kinds of creatures in our clearing,
He said.
and I think we should move. What if the terrible things come back?
Nonsense,
Said Big Rabbit.
Why should we move? This has always been our home, and the terrible things won't come back. We are white rabbits. It couldn't happen to us.
As day followed peaceful day, Little Rabbit thought Big Rabbit must be right, until the day the terrible things came back. Little Rabbit saw the terrible gleam of their terrible eyes through the forest darkness, and he smelled again the terrible smell.
We have come for any creature that is white.
The terrible things thundered.
We have come for you.
The rabbit scampered in every direction.
Help! Somebody help!
But there was no one left to help, and the big circling nets dropped over them and the terrible things carried them away.
All but Little Rabbit, who was little enough to hide in a pile of rocks by the pond and smart enough to stay so still that the terrible things thought he was a rock himself. When they had all gone, Little Rabbit crept into the middle of the empty clearing.
I should have tried to help the other rabbits. If only we creatures had stuck together, it would have been different.
Sadly, Little Rabbit left the clearing. He'd go tell the other forest creatures about the terrible things.
He hoped someone would listen.
Let's take a moment to reflect and think about what this story tells us. It tells us if we do not speak out for others, there might be no one left to speak out for us if we need it.
Things could have been so different for everyone had our voices been used to stand up for each other.
Some people are brave enough to speak out, even if the bad things that are happening do not happen to them. If we see something that is unfair when someone is suffering, we should do the right thing and tell someone.
Many years ago, during World War II, people such as the Jews were treated unfairly just because of who they were or what they believed in. Some people were brave and spoke up, whilst many others didn't. Afterwards, like Little Rabbit, they wished they had.
In Europe during World War II, many people looked the other way. While terrible things happened, they pretended not to know that their neighbours were being taken away, transported by trains, and imprisoned in concentration camps.
They pretended to not hear cries for help. The Nazis killed millions of Jews in the Holocaust. If everyone had stood together at the first sign of evil, would this have happened?
Ailey will now read a poem we thought appropriate for today. Please listen closely and reflect on the words.
Auschwitz, the semi-quaver chugging on the trains of the track, and the people on board who will never go back, and the terror in the eyes of all the young ones to go. with no one knowing as the train comes to slow. Those men at the station as the ramps drop down, where humanity lost is the only crippled sound. Hope gone for those who stand behind the sharp hard wire, and the smoke in the tower rise just a little higher, and the blue ink stabs a little harder in the skin, above the veins of despair where murder let in. The terror in the eyes of all those about to leave, another train on the track with no last minute reprieve, and the slow crotchet chugging on the trains on the track, and the people on board who'll never go back.
It's also important that we think about the impact on families when hatred and prejudice is allowed to happen.
A group of P6 would now like to sing a song chosen from today. Please listen closely and reflect on the words of the song and the images that appear.
Community events such as this are very important to us as we spend some time together reflecting on the events of the past, but also looking forward to the opportunity we have to build a better future. It is our hope that we can all come to realise the role each one of us can play in making our world a better place.
Realise that each and every voice, no matter how small, truly can make a difference. When we stand by each other and show love instead of hatred, the world can be better for all of us.
Be ashamed to cry.
It is important that we do not forget the people who had their lives taken away from them because of hatred, simply because they were different in some way. By taking time to remember, maybe then we can finally learn the lesson of the past and turn our backs on hatred forever.
Primary 6 are studying the novel Refugee by Alan Gratz, through which we are learning a great deal for the impact of hatred and war has on innocent lives. This novel has helped us to prepare our virtual Holocaust Memorial assembly today, as one way of ensuring that we will never forget what can happen when hatred is allowed to stand.
In preparing for this assembly, we have looked at the lives of many different people.
One such life story that we looked at, P6 found particularly inspiring and we wanted to share with you today.
We know about this girl's story because of this book. This book is called The Diary of a Young Girl. The diary was written between 1942 and 1944 by a young Jewish girl called Anne Frank in Amsterdam, capital of the Netherlands. Anne was given the diary for her 13th birthday just before she and her family had to hide from the Nazis who invaded the Netherlands in 1940 during the Second World War.
Before Anne went into hiding, the Nazis had already taken away many basic rights from the Jewish people in the Netherlands. Just because of their faith, these are some of the rules Jews had to obey.
All Jewish people had to sew a yellow star onto their coats and be sure it was visible at all times when they were on the streets.
Jews were not allowed to ride in cars, trains, buses and trams.
Jews were not allowed to have bicycles.
Jews can only do their shopping between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m.
Jews were not allowed to go to the cinema, theatres or other places of entertainment, nor were they allowed to use swimming pools, tennis court or any other sports field.
Jews were not allowed to sit in their gardens or those of their friends after 8 p.m.
Jews were not allowed to visit non-Jewish friends in their homes.
In one of our first entries in the diary, Anne wrote,
"Paper has more patience than people."
This was a saying Anne had heard. Since she felt that she didn't have a close friend, she thought of her diary as her best friend and called it Kitty.
A month later, in July 1942, Anne Frank's family had to pack up and go into hiding very suddenly when her 16-year-old sister, Margot, received a letter telling her that she had to report the authorities in the morning. This meant she would be taken away to work camp, what we now know is actually a concentration camp.
She wrote in her diary,
Started packing our most important belongings into a satchel. The first thing I stuck in was this diary, then curlers, handkerchiefs, school books, a comb and some old letters. Preoccupied about going into hiding, I stuck the craziest things into that satchel. But I'm not sorry. Memories mean more to me than dresses.
Anne and her family had to go into hiding, and her diary became even more important to her. It was a place where she could write down her deepest feelings about what was happening day by day, and also her thoughts and hopes for the future.
Despite the difficulties that Anne and her family were going through, life was able to go on. It is remarkable that Anne, a girl only a few years older than we are, could still see good in the world in the midst of her pain. Anne wrote,
I don't think of all the misery, but all the beauty that remains.
In one of the last entries in her diary, she wrote,
It's utterly impossible for me to build my life on a foundation of chaos, suffering and death. I see the world being slowly transformed into a wilderness. I hear the approaching thunder that one day will destroy us too. I feel the suffering of millions, and yet when I look up at the sky, I somehow feel that everything will change for the better, that this cruelty will end too, that peace and tranquility will return once more. In the meantime, I must hold on to my ideals. Perhaps the day will come when I'll be able to realise them.
In August 1944, the Frank family were discovered in their hiding place. Anne and her family were sent to a concentration camp. Life there was full of horrors. Anne's mother died first, then later her sister. Anne died of hunger and a disease 3 weeks before the British and American soldiers reached the camp and set the people free. Anne was almost 16. In her short life, she had experienced many kinds of injustice, but never gave up hope.
It really is amazing someone like Anne, who is only a few years older than us, was able to see the good in the world, even in the depths of darkness, cruelty and pain. In the darkest hours of her life, Anne was still able to maintain her belief in a better tomorrow, that despite the darkness there is light.
We can all play our part in preventing prejudice and hatred happening again. We can be kind towards everyone, even if they are not our special friend. We can try to understand how other people might be feeling. We can stand up for people. We can share these stories and ideas with other people through talking, writing and poetry.
Maybe from today we can learn that our voice truly can make a difference, that if we stand up for those who are unable to stand up for themselves, we can give a voice to the voiceless, hope to those in despair, be a friend to the lonely.
All you have to do is Just think what might be possible if we can learn to stand by others when they need us and treat everyone with respect. That is our wish for our world today.
To close our virtual time together today, we would like to thank you all for taking time to watch and listen along with all the classes of Ayr Grammar Primary in our virtual remembrance of the Holocaust.